Şimdi bir 10 dakikalık aramız var. Ondan sonra çünkü önemli bir sunum. Aslında bugünün en önemlilerinden bir tanesi. Karbon offset ile karbon removal arasındaki farkı anlatacak ve C-Capsule'ü tanıtacak Travis. Daha sonra da bugün konuşmacıların hepsi bir araya gelerek bugün konuştuğumuz konuları özetleyen bir soru cevap yapacağız. Sorularınızı orada isteyeceğiz. Ben önemli noktaların altını çizeceğimiz noktaları Türkçe söyleyeceğim. Soruları Türkçe alıp İngilizce çevirebiliriz. En sonunda çok kısa tutacağım Photon Eco'yu anlatacağız ve ondan sonra Network Drinks'e geçeceğiz. Sanırım hepimiz bu güzel havada onu bekliyoruz. Çeyrek kala o zaman görüşürüz. Şimdi programda karbona başlayacağız. Bu noktaya kadar hep yenilenebilir enerjiden bahsettik. Çünkü aslında IREC'in ilk metodolojisi, standardı elektrik üzerineydi. Ama günümüzde ne oluyor? Enerji dönüşümü hızla geliyor ve enerji dönüşümüyle beraber yeni ürünleri ortaya koymamız gerekiyor. Buradaki en büyük tartışmalardan bir tanesi karbon konusu. Yıllarca ülkemizde de yenilenebilir enerji santralleri karbon projesi olarak projelerini kaydetti ve elektrik üretimlerinden ne kadar karbon azaltımı yaptıkları ölçülerek kredi aldılar. Bu tabii çok farklı bir piyasa. Bu piyasada şöyle bir örnek verelim. Yenilenebilir enerji tesisi X birim elektrik üretiyor. Türkiye'deki toplam ulusal şebekede ne kadar karbon salımı yapıldıysa elektrik üretmek için o kadarlık karbon azaltımı yapmıştır diyoruz. Ama aslında bu hesaplama metodolojisiyle ilgili de kafalarda soru işareti oluşuyor. Burada aslında şunu anlamamız lazım. Bu karbon offsetlerine, gönüllü karbon piyasasına ilgi nereden geliyor? IREC'in buradaki duruşu ne? Ve biz nasıl bu konuyu gelecekte evrileceğini düşünüp ona göre ürünler üretiyoruz? Bunları anlatmak için Travis, Caddy, Evident takımında aslında. Oranın bir spin-off'u C-Capsule. Orayı Jeremy ile beraber lead ediyorlar. Kendisi bu konuda yani bütün karbon sertifikalarının geçmişi, bugünü ve geleceğiyle ilgili çok iyi bir uzman. Daha yeni New York'tan geldi zaten. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So Travis.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sean. As he mentioned, so I work for Evident with Ed, and I'm part of the product development team. So we're developing new products that are adherent to the IREC standard. So we've heard about the origins of IREC in electricity. Jared spoke about hydrogen. I'm now going to be talking about durable carbon removal. So if we look at the voluntary carbon market today, it's dissected into several distinct mitigation types. So from the left going to the right, it's mainly focused on emission avoidance, reduction, but there's also removal, each with their own kind of varying levels of market maturation. To date, the market has primarily specialized in avoided emissions and reductions, so focusing on renewable energy production, nature protection. These types of projects are focused on preventing carbon and other GHG emissions from entering the atmosphere. And it's also specialized in short-term carbon removal through nature restoration, planting trees, afforestation, reforestation. But there's now an urgent demand for a new type of carbon removal, which is predicated on durability. And when I say durable, I'm talking about number 5 on the taxonomy for carbon offsets, which was released by the Oxford University. When I say durable, if we can move to the next slide, please. I'm focusing on technologies and processes that are directly capturing carbon from the atmosphere and putting it away for long-term sequestration, either through utilization in a product like concrete or storage through geological formations. So when we look at durable carbon removal, I'm referring to most of the methodologies that you can see on this screen, apart from soil carbon and afforestation and reforestation, which focus on decadal sequestration. The aim of durable carbon removal is to lock away carbon dioxide and other GHG emissions for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Next slide, please. And why do we need durable carbon removal? Simply put, we left emission reductions too late. And so if we want to keep the Paris Climate Agreement alive, then we need not only to accelerate emission reductions, but also actively start drawing down carbon and other GHG emissions from the atmosphere and putting it away for long-term storage or utilization. So what's gone up must now come down. Next slide, please. How much durable carbon removal is needed? Quite a lot. So according to the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they say we need to be removing 10 gigatons a year by 2050. And to put that into perspective, we're less than 0.026% of the way there. Last year, around 50,000 tons of carbon removal was delivered. This value tends to vary depending on what you count as durable. The majority of 50,000 is coming from biochar projects, with a little bit coming from direct air capture and also bio-oil and sequestration. So the challenge to scale carbon removal from tens of thousands to tens of billions is a monumental one. And we're going to need to leverage carbon markets to scale. Next slide, please. The problem is that the current voluntary carbon market is not fit for purpose. So if I just jump along here, I said that most of the certificates in the voluntary carbon market to date focus on what we call an avoided emission, so renewable energy production or clean cook stoves, things like that. And the problem with that, if I'm a company and I emit 1 ton and then pay a project to avoid emitting 1 ton to the atmosphere, 1 ton of carbon is still left in the atmosphere. And that means that you're not generating any kind of carbon neutrality. What we need to transition towards is carbon removal. So if I'm a company or a government and I emit 1 ton, then I need to pay someone to actively draw down carbon from the atmosphere and put it away for long-term sequestration. And that will enable companies and governments to make net zero claims. And C-Capsule will be one of these solutions. So our mission, accredited to the International Attribute Tracking Standard, is to certify durable carbon removal so that every net ton of carbon removed from the atmosphere can be booked onto the registry and ultimately claimed by an end user. C-Capsule is mainly a demand-side driven product, stemming from all of these net zero targets which are popping up at the moment. If I may just ask a question, because I know there are beneficiaries in this room, has any organization here set a net zero target? Okay, we've got 2 hands. So by setting a net zero target, you are by default saying that you need to buy carbon removal, durable carbon removal, in the future in order to reach that target. Existing offsets today will not satisfy the quality threshold, and that's what we're doing with C-Capsule. We are sitting there in the middle to facilitate this exchange of attribute ownership. So we're certifying suppliers, the removers themselves who are removing carbon from the atmosphere, certifying their activity so that they can generate revenue and scale, but also allow buyers to claim the CDR that they are doing for their own emissions reporting. Now, different to existing carbon markets, we're doing things slightly differently, and we're really leveraging the infrastructure and governance framework of the IREX standard, and we're trying to create clear separation of roles and responsibilities. So at the top, we have the IREX standard, as you are all aware. They own and manage the international attribute tracking standards. It's agnostic, it's non-technical. we as the code manager, C-Capsule, exist to implement the rules and principles set by the standard. And then we appoint various different market facilitators who also require accreditation by the IREC Foundation. For example, the registry operator, which will be evident, local issuers, also verification authorities who are required to do some of the independent audits for some of the methodologies. And then also we have additional roles, platform operators like marketplaces who can extend the functionality of the registry, redemption authorities, labeling authorities, and insurance bodies. Carbon markets are going to become incredibly sophisticated over time. And one of the points that I'd like to make is particularly focusing on risk and the management of risk. So typically in carbon markets, risk is managed at the issuer level. They create the risk by issuing the certificate. They rate the risk by determining what credits need to enter a buffer pool. And then finally, they also underwrite the risk by owning the buffer pool. The problem is that creates a monopoly on risk management, and it hasn't allowed carbon markets to scale in the way that they need to. So what we want to do with C-Capsule, using the IREC governance framework, is to disaggregate these roles and responsibilities. And so the core principle that I want to get across here is that we're trying to promote a market where everyone has a role. As my colleague Ed mentioned earlier, we like to think in terms of partners rather than competitors. I think every actor in the carbon market can play a potential role here. And this is in stark contrast to how carbon markets have been designed today, where there tends to be a complete monopoly at the standard setting functionality, the registry, the issuing function. All of these things are part of one big monopoly. We're trying to do things differently. Next slide, please. Why C-Capsule? So I've kind of already gone through a bit of the points about how we are different from existing carbon standards and registries. But we're also, we're completely new in this space, obviously. So IREC has tended to focus on electricity previously, and there's a lot of concern with existing CDR developers about existing standards and registries, what we call legacy certifiers. And I talk with a new carbon removal company every week, and they don't want to go down the conventional offset route. And this particular article, actually, if I just read out the bottom, it says, if you're working on building a solution for certification that has the right incentives to support long-term quality standards, please get in touch. We're interested. And I actually spoke to the CEO of this particular company, Charm Industrial, this week, who's rejected legacy certifiers because of issues around trust, quality, time-consuming issuance, the expense as well. Existing standards and registries typically extract about 10 to 30% of the value, the end value of the carbon certificate. At C-Capsule, we're trying to keep these costs down as much as possible. And C-Capsule, it was designed as a voluntary and compliance tool. So although our short-term goals are to be accepted in the voluntary carbon market, we're looking at endorsement from ICROA, ICVCM, and acceptance by standards, consumer claim standards like SBTI. It was also built as a compliance tool. And I think my colleague Jared touched on this earlier in relation to CBAM. We see C-Capsule potentially becoming a contractually defined emission ownership accredited to the international REC standards so that it could effectively neutralize the associated carbon emissions of any product entering the EU trade bloc under the CBAM mechanism. But there's also Article 6.4. I think a gentleman earlier today mentioned Article 6 and the interaction between IREC instruments with the UNFCCC. Interestingly, UNFCCC, they released within the last few days a public consultation on carbon removal in relation to Article 6.4 and how mechanisms like C-Capsule could potentially interact. And a lot of the benefits and advantages to C-Capsule in terms of clear governance, trust and quality would essentially allow it to be traded under Article 6.4, particularly the acceptance that governments can take a role and play a part within our ecosystem. And also, we just responded at the beginning of this week to a public consultation by BEIS, who are the Department for Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy for the UK government, about the acceptance of voluntary instruments like C-Capsule into emissions trading schemes. But that's not just specific to UK, it can also include others like the EU ETS, for example. Next slide, please. So the next steps, so we've almost completed registry development, which is very exciting. We're now doing internal user acceptance testing, and we want to have accreditation to the International Attribute Tracking Standard by the end of this year. And then we're going to commence our pilot with our first methodology, which is focused on distributed biochar in Africa. And 2023 and beyond, we want to accredit and approve new methodologies in several discussions with existing methodology providers today, but also new technologies that are developing their own methodologies to get them approved for C-Capsule issuance. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the pilot is going to start in Africa with distributed biochar. We're looking at several target markets, Uganda, Kenya, South Korea, Namibia. And the particular methodology that we're focusing on to begin with is biochar, because it's one of the most accessible, durable carbon removal solutions today. And this particular methodology focuses on low-tech kilns, but high-tech data box and verification systems, which allows for automated verification and data collection at the issuer level. That's the end of my presentation. I think we may move on to a panel discussion now with my colleague Ed and the ARIC Foundation. Perfect, yeah.
Ya, şimdi biz hemen mikrofonları takıp ekrana geleceğiz. 4 tane sandalye koyalım. Aslında sorularınızı orada da alabiliriz. Bu konularla ilgili ben diğer katılımcılara da sorular soracağım ve çevirmeye çalışacağım ki Travis'in anlattıklarının üzerinden bir kez daha geçebilelim.